welcome into this week's book club episode of Star Wars Empire's End. Aftermath Empire's End. If you are unfamiliar with the series, go ahead and click here and it'll take you back to the beginning. Basically, we are going through this book trilogy a couple of chapters at a time, and that link will take you back to our discussion about the first book. This is the third book in the trilogy. If you're just joining us and you want to begin with us with the beginning of this book, go ahead and click here. And I'll take you to that playlist. But with that, let's jump in because we have a ton of stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about chapters 14, 15, and 16, and oh man. Okay, so you may have noticed last week when we were discussing the apparent death of Mr. Bones, my favorite character in the trilogy, that I was not particularly heartbroken, and no, that was not because I was sad because I knew it happened already. It was because I knew he's not dead. Bones is back. This is actually quite an amazing scene where he is able to reassemble himself. He kind of now in a way pulls a bit of an Ant-Man, and through the luck of a rodent shows up and frees him from the restraining bolt, and then he's able to put himself back together. It's like this really strange automated Franken Bones kind of scene, the way he reassembles himself. What's interesting is it goes through Bones' various memories, and of course his time as a battle droid is there, but then he discusses what is pretty obviously General Grievous. I mean, a droid with 4 arms and lightsabers. I think they referenced this a ways back, but this was the most overt thing, that one of Bones' combat modules is apparently from the discarded body of General Grievous. If you remember in Revenge of the Sith, you can see Grievous's body just chilling when Obi-Wan takes his ship. And so I don't know if there is a canonical story about where his body goes, but at the very least it looks like some of his combat stuff was stolen. It's also a big thing with Bones. What we learn about with him is his programming. So this part is actually kind of sweet. It talks about how Timon is his master, not because he's been programmed to think of Timon as his master, but because he sees Timon as his maker. So obviously he would follow Timon, as a droid who remembers so many different deaths from all of the different parts of his brain. To be given life again is something that he has a lot of gratitude for, and that is why he follows Timon, which is pretty interesting. I also like that the explanation for why Bones is so out there is because why Timon is really talented, he's just talented enough to put Bones together, but not educated enough to realize that he's put Bones together the wrong way, and I'll put that in quotation marks. If Timon did things the right way, in quotation marks, all of the different parts of Bones' brain would work together smoothly. But it's because Timon has this right amount of skill and not skill, that he kind of accidentally made this crazy thing that is Mr. Bones. It made me think of R2-D2. It's discussed in one of the early episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars that Anakin never wipes R2's memory, even though he's supposed to do so regularly. And that's where a lot of R2's kind of crazy personality things come from, is most droids are not supposed to go this long without having a memory wipe. Even 3PO has had, a few more memory wipes than R2. So it kind of made me think of that. Even though it's not necessarily the same principle, it's this idea of the more memory a droid has, the more kind of uniquely them they become. So then we hit chapter 15. With chapter 15, we are finally with Rax again. Rax is slowly just kind of going a little nutty under the weight of his own grandeur, is almost the best way to put it. He thinks he's pulling this off perfectly. He sees all of the crazy stormtroopers as a sign that he's successfully culling the herd, as it were. He's taking out all the weak parts of the Empire and keeping just the strong bits that can survive, even though it just continues down this, I keep saying this over and over again, but it keeps continuing down this kind of Mad Max sort of vibes with everything that's going on. We can kind of see to the point of how much Rax is really feeling confident in that he wants to kill the propaganda guy, Odar, or whatever. His name always reminds me of the one guy from Hunger Games. But he wants to kill the propaganda guy because he doesn't need the propaganda guy anymore. And he kind of turns on him, and he describes that guy was a fan of Sloane, and Rax is so done with Sloane and so disappointed in Sloane. And I think part of that is, well, she doesn't fit with my plan, so she doesn't count anymore. But I think part of that is also he's a little salty because she doesn't fit with his plan. He trusts almost nobody now because of Sloane. The only person he's kind of hanging on to trusting is Daddy Hux. Where the chapter goes from there is he's found Kolob, or Kolob, however you would say that, the old kind of warden caretaker guy of the orphanage that Gally grew up in, and he wants to tell him, have this moment of, aha, look at what I've done. And it's a really interesting scene because Rax goes on about, you said that children should be seen and not heard, and he talks about certainly not good child rearing, if not bordering on cruelty with what this guy was doing to these kids. So you're not really endeared to Kolob, nor does he deny any of the things Rax is saying about him. But Rax is a bad guy at the same time. So you kind of have like these two bad guys, and it's like, okay, is this orphanage runner simply just not denying any of the charges laid against him because what's the point? And maybe it really wasn't that bad? Or are these just kind of two bad people squaring off? Because especially the way Kolob's described, I mean, he's not, he's not going to win any daycare awards by any stretch of the imagination. But Jakku is a harsh world, and so it added a lot to that kind of dynamic, and it humanizes Rax in kind of an odd way, because Rax has been played as so grand and having these big schemes, and this moment he has with his former caretaker is so personal and does not fit seemingly into any kind of greater scheme. Like, this is him really just wanting to tell this guy off, which is interesting, and just kind of a deep feral moment where you can see that these undertones exist for Rax. What is interesting to me is that for all of Rax's devotion, he has no care for the Force, especially because he's so devoted to Palpatine, who does have the Force. He talks about this with Tashu, who's there, and that's just an interesting thing to me. Like, his devotion is to Palpatine, to himself, to his own plans, to the Empire, but not to the Force at all. That is one thing he doesn't really understand, and yet he has this sense of destiny, and that's unique. I feel like in Star Wars, you either have the people who are like early days Han Solo, who are like, you kind of go and make your own way, or you have the Qui-Gon Jinns that are like, no, the Force is always at work. But to have somebody who's like, so we have destiny, but not the Force, is also makes him kind of a unique character within canon. And then here comes the big thing. So I remembered that these guys existed, the Sentinels, but in rereading it, it's got me really excited for some ideas of what could happen in The Rise of Skywalker. But these Sentinels are messenger droids, and they exist in less dramatic ways, just kind of going around sending notes and whatnot, but there are these specific Sentinels that are specific to Rax and what Rax is up to, and they're like these weird droid bodies. They're described as sentient, and they have a holographic Palpatine face, and they're almost like these strange Palpatine heralds that run around. And it's just creepy. You can also see them in Battlefront 2, the story mode for Battlefront 2. So I've been saying that a lot of what's going to happen in this book, if you are familiar with or have played the story for Battlefront 2, this is going to a point you are already familiar with. I'm just not talking about it for the sake of keeping it spoiler-free for the people who've read the book. In the event you are one of those people that literally wants to know absolutely nothing about Episode 9, stop listening here for the next, 2 minutes. Starting now, but it's interesting to me, this idea of the Sentinels, because it's a possibility that this could be one of the ways that Palpatine comes back, especially if the droid really is sentient. And thinking about it, if Palpatine coming back is just going to be a clone or just going to be a ghost, it might as well be a sentient droid. I don't know that this is how they're going to do it. I don't know that I'm going to bet money, be like, this is what Palpatine's going to be, especially not before we've seen a full theatrical trailer instead of just the teaser. But it's on the list of options. And this is what I was talking about. Empire's End was from this time in the new canon before The Last Jedi was coming out, where all roads were leading to Jakku. Empire's End was, Lost Stars was, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was, we had all of these things that kind of kept coming back to Jakku was important. And then to have not only Jakku be important, but a sentient Palpatine droid, I mean, that's something that's interesting. And certainly something I wouldn't rule out. I don't know that I believe that it is for sure, but I would put it on the list of possibilities. Then ultimately, at the end of the chapter, Rex realizes that Sloane is on the planet and wants all of the planet's guns turned on her, which is about to become important here in chapter 16. So chapter 16 is more like Mad Max kind of descriptions. The hut on her like dais being pulled by the Chrome Boys. Again, it feels a lot like Fury Road in that regard. Sloane and Brenton are talking, and they get in a very deep conversation about why they're fighting. And Sloane at this point is full vengeance. She is only out for vengeance. She does not think the Empire can be recovered. She's not trying to take the Empire back from Rex. She thinks it's over. The only thing she is going on is the idea that she could take Rex's empire from him in the way Rex took her empire from herself. And that's what she's out there trying to do, which is interesting because at this point I feel like, at least up until this point, Nora has been running on vengeance. We'll see here after she's rescued if that motivation changes at all. You have two women that are two sides of the same coin, kind of running on the same motivation, hate each other, but I still like the dynamic that Nora really hates Sloane, and Sloane, like, knows who Nora is, but really doesn't care, and yet Sloane is, like, traveling the galaxy with her husband. Like, it's just a very strange character dynamic going on there that feels very different from what you would see in other stories. And then Brenton starts talking, and you think Brenton's out for revenge. You think he's out to go after Rex for putting a chip in his head, but it turns out that's not really what he's doing. He says that, it certainly wouldn't make him feel worse to get back at Rex, but what he's really trying to do is prove himself a hero, because he knows his wife and his son saw him as this person on stage, that he describes it as the man on the stage. And he's trying to prove that he's not that guy for Nora and Brenton. And of course, Nora at least probably doesn't need that. Timon, I'm sorry, I think I've been saying Brenton for everybody. But Timon saw him that way. Timon might take some time to come around, but at the same time, I think Timon needs so much stability in his life right now. I think he would have accepted Brenton. So it's that classic tragic family story of one family member trying to prove themselves to family that don't really need him to prove himself. But Sloane doesn't believe it. Sloane's like, that can't possibly be, what it really is about, and they kind of argue about it. Brenton calls Sloane out for wanting to make a move now. He's like, we've been walking here in the desert. You could have made a move at any point in time. The reason why you want to go after Nema right now is because you're desperate and you're impatient. And he goes as far as to tell Sloane that the reason why she can't understand his motivations and thinks that he must also be after vengeance is because she doesn't love anyone and is not loved by anyone. And that hits her where it hurts. It makes Sloane realize how alone she is, where Brenton has something to kind of fight for. And they talk about that, but then, it gets into, Sloane does try to get away, they get into a fight. Brenton doesn't necessarily want to, but he knows that it's not going to help if Sloane gets hurt. In fact, he might be blamed anyway, so, he helps to fight. And at the last minute, those guns that Rax wanted fired upon Sloane start firing. And so Sloane and Brenton get away to go hide in the mountains somewhere, and that's pretty much where these chapters end. So, like I said, there's a lot of deep stuff going on there, just from the excitement of seeing Bones coming back being kind of this new renewal of hope for Nora, so we'll see if that changes her character or she continues to be very Nora about things in the upcoming chapters. We get to see more from Rax, and just how much Rax is kind of falling into his own mania as the story continues, and then finally, seeing some really intense moments between Sloane and Brenton, which is, again, a very interesting pair, because these are two people who should not have teamed up, and yet they're teaming up, and it's really interesting seeing them together. But that's what I have for this week. For next week, we will continue reading. It's gonna do a thing I don't really like to do, but we're gonna do it anyway. We're going to finish a part and start a part in the same week's reading. So go ahead and read the interlude. The interlude is next in the book. It's an interlude on Christophsis. And then you're going to read chapter 17, and that's going to end part 2. We'll move on to part 3. Go ahead and read chapter 18, the first part of part 3. Or the first chapter of part 3. So that's interlude, 17, 18. which will conclude part 2 and start part 3. That's what we'll discuss next week. Please, as always, leave a comment letting me know what you think. Make sure you're following us on all of the socials. I'm happy to talk to you guys there, either on Twitter or, in our Discord, wherever. And I will talk to you guys next week.